Good morning, everyone, and we're back. Our next session is called Film and Literature, Tension and Translation. I have the honor of having our two speakers today, Sarge Lacuesta, Angelo Lacuesta, and Tanya Yuson. This panel, the abstract for this panel says it's prize-winning fictionist Sarge Lacuesta and international film producer Tanya Yuson discuss the techniques and tension involved in crossing over to film popular literary works. So it's a very interesting panel. And we'll begin with our first speaker, Angelo R. Lacuesta, or Sarge. He's a multi-awarded novelist, short story writer, screenwriter, and filmmaker. His most recent publication is the novel Iro, tama ba? Which was selected as one of 10 novels to be presented for possible film adaptation at the Books at Berlinale section of the Berlinale Film Festival. I'm sorry. In 2024, he wrote and produced the film An Errand, which was selected as part of the Bright Future section of the 2025 International Film Festival, Rotterdam. He is co-managing director of Good Intentions Books, an independent publishing house based in Manila. He is editor-at-large at Esquire Philippines and is the current president of the Philippine Center of Pen International. We're going to hand the floor over to Sarge. Thank you.
Hi, Lelay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please don't crowd. I know isn't anybody going to crowd? But seriously, thank you for having me. And I'm here to talk about tension and translation. Such a perfect title though, for our movie, An Errand. Now, I'm going to show, before I do anything, I'm going to show a short trailer of An Errand so you get an idea of what the movie is about. No? So, next slide, please. This is audio. No?
Pakikuha ng t-shirt ko, Givenchy, yung may design ng Mona Lisa sa harap. Alam mo, painting sa Paris, basta babae na parang naka-smile na parang hindi.
Saan niyo po naiwan, sir?
Sa bahay.
Sa Maynila po?
Oo, Maroy.
Kahit gaano pa tayo katagal, pwede tayong bitiwan.
Ay, kalisod, kalisod sang binayaan.
Hindi mo na kailangan pumorma ng ganyan.
Adlaw,
Simple lang tayo.
gabi, pirmita ikaw, ginatangisan.
Nalis na siya, oh.
Ay,
Galing mo talaga, no?
day,
Siguro pinatago sa ebidensya.
sing kapalaran.
Hindi naman. Pinatapon lang.
Walay gid, sarang ko kalipayan.
So, An Errand had its world premiere at the International Film Festival, Rotterdam, last year. No, early this year. Early this year. I forgot, such a long year. But what's more interesting is that it started, next slide please. It started as a short story. So I'll give you the synopsis. I don't have to read this. No? So it's a story basically of a family driver who's told by his employer, his boss, who is, and they're his boss is shacking up with his lover in a mountain city about 250 kilometers from Manila, which is about a 4-hour drive. His boss just tells him to go down to Manila, get something from his home, and bring it back up to Baguio, the mountain city, as one trip, one long trip. He's supposed to pick up a t-shirt and a tin of medicine. Now, that's the entire plot of the story. But as the driver goes down, his mind goes into loops and remembrances, fantasies and memory. And the errand is actually about him picking up a tin of Viagra so that he can please his mistress, who's with him in Baguio, in that mountain city. So a very basic errand for a driver. But it's very complicated when it comes to class issues, because you have the employer, you have the family driver, and you have the staff at home, and the employer also is a lawyer working for a very crooked, sort of corrupt politician, which is shorthand really for all politicians in our country. So throughout that part, he goes into memory, fantasy, and in the end, he visualizes his own dreams, because all drivers want to be bodyguards. They want to carry guns. They want to protect their employers. But at the end of the day, they're still drivers. So that the tension there, in I believe in truth telling in cinema, the tension there is telling the truth about the very precise middle class striations of the lower class driver, the middle class employer, the upper class boss of the employer, and all of the other drivers that surround him. So there was a real struggle to show that in film because, next slide please, because how it really started was, how An Errand started was as a short story that was published in the Art and Craft of Asian Stories. So this is published by Bloomsbury. It's a textbook on the Asian short story. And so An Errand was first a short story. So I had to translate it linguistically into Filipino because cinema is easier. Filipino cinema is naturally written in Filipino, in Tagalog, or in any other Filipino languages. That means that there was a sort of little tension in translation there. I'm a Filipino writer in English by default. I have no choice because I grew up in a country that was brought up in English, and I grew up in a school that taught English. We went to the same school together, Laloy, a Jesuit school. So two items of translation that really provided a lot of terror, in the operating theater, as it were. The first is translating an English text that I had written into a Filipino script. Second is translating something very mundane. If you read the short story, I don't expect you to read it, but if you read the short story, it's a very boring story. In fact, one of our reviews said, there's no plot in this movie. In this movie, An Errand. Literally, the plot is the errand. So, and I'm gonna get to that point because translation into Filipino contained its own problems. How do we encode class, specific class striations in language? Because in English, it's all in English, and you sort of, the way Salman Rushdie did in East West, in his collection of short stories, you immediately knew, even if he was writing in English, that it was a lower class Indian, lower caste Indian that was talking, or a Brahmin that was talking. The second item of translation, the more difficult one, was making sure that we hit the target right when we were talking about a family driver. How would he dress? How would he talk? What would be his habits? What would be his dreams? When we talked about the employer, it was also different. How was he going to go out at night talking to the driver? Was going to be in a smoking jacket? Would he be in a designer jacket? His mistress would be somewhere in between. So inevitably, many Filipino literary Filipino stories are stories about class. And inevitably, even the language of the story enters the class play. So, interestingly, the film enjoyed a lot of positive reviews in Rotterdam, but not so many positive reviews. We had mixed reviews in Manila, in the Philippines. But this also revealed to me the kind of failure the film had in terms of connecting with its supposed audience, which led us to question, are we doing things right? As a writer, I actually assigned myself the role of being producer of the film, a creative producer of the film, because as a writer, I felt that I needed to control that aspect of how class communicated itself through clothing and through the way they comported themselves and through their language. I was also very aware that in the Philippine setting, class plays a major issue in literature and in cinema. No, this is why some films fail, why some films succeed. And when I say fail or succeed, it's either box office or audience critique, no, or even your own personal critique when you look at it from your own class and you evaluate it. There are different codes and different kinds of. There are different criteria for what makes a good ending, for example. So it was very difficult doing this in that sense. That's it.
Oh, nice and pithy, Sarge.
Thank
as,
you.
As always.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Tanya, you have a lot of time. Our next
won't take up
speaker.
too
I can
much
speak
of it.
some more, right? You know.
I
Well,
won't take too much
we'll
of
give
it.
time to the audience later on.
Q&A is way more fun.
Yeah, well, you're both fun. Our next speaker is Tanya Yuson, who is a founding partner and chief creative development officer of Base Entertainment, a studio based out of Jakarta and Singapore that develops, finances, produces, and distributes content for the Indonesian market as well as for the international market. She is the executive producer and head writer for Trese, the first Southeast Asian original anime series for Netflix, co-showrunner for Amazon Prime's Video's Comedy Island, both the Philippine and Indonesian versions, as well as showrunner for Cigarette Girl, Indonesia's first Netflix original series, which debuted at the Busan International Film Festival and won Best Miniseries at the 2024 Seoul International Drama Awards. Salamat pagi, terima kasih, silakan Tanya.
Thank you. Just to be clear, I'm Filipino.
And I only speak a fake Indonesian. I don't really speak.
It's okay. So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. My name is Tanya Yuson. As he said, my company is based out of Indonesia and Singapore. Aside from the Indonesian content, we also develop Filipino content, and one of the very first projects we worked on is called Trese. So essentially, Trese was started as a graphic novel, just to give you context. Since we're talking about translation, it really is about adaptation, mostly from like the written word or in the graphic novel sense, something that is on the page, which a lot you leave to your imagination, to a medium that is visual or an audiovisual medium, and in this case, an animated series. So for Trese, it started out as a graphic novel in the Philippines that I found and shared with my business partner, who's Indonesian, and it was something that we think it's set in Manila, and just to give it a very quick sort of synopsis, it's a noir where there is a young woman, Alexandra Trese, and she takes it upon herself when the police cannot solve the murders that are happening in the city, as it happens. They call her because more or less the perpetrator of that murder or that crime might be a supernatural creature based on Philippine mythological creatures. So in a nutshell, that's what it was. And what attracted me to that was that there was so much about Philippine culture, but presented in a very modern way, in a very, contemporary way that also subverted and put on its here a lot of the old wives' tales and the mythological creatures that we've had, in our lore, in our history. Yeah, exactly. So with that, the other aspect of that also was that it was a noir mystery, which is a broader appeal. A lot of people who might not come from the Philippine culture, it's kind of a standard. You can relate it from that crime mystery solving angle. And it was just a good story, well told, and something that could be adapted to a feature. So if I can go to the next slide for this one. So this is a sample of the graphic novel of Trese, which will be available, and you'll see it also. Pick it up and have a read. I think they have the English versions here, but it's also distributed like internationally. There are a lot of key markets that have it. But you already see that Budget and Kajo, the creators of it, really created this fantastic world where you were familiar with the tikbalang. These are the names of the creatures: tikbalang, aswang, manananggal. But the core emotional stories of these creatures was just so fascinating because it was real and emotional. So then the challenge would be, one, how would we set it up? Would it be a feature film? Would it be a series? So that was a challenge as a producer. Like, where do we see it? Then number two is like, how would we be presenting it to what audience? initially for the, for the feature world or for like when you're adapting something, you always think about who your primary audience would be. And for this story, we really wanted it to be for a Filipino audience to understand. So we spent 10 years, me and my business partner, trying to pitch it, like set it up with different studios, companies to do it as a live action. And everybody loved it. Everybody loved the source material. We had several different takes. They all wanted to do it, but with its one thing or another, the budgets were too high. At that point, and maybe to this point, like Philippine theatrical, so like the movies, it wasn't going to justify the kind of budgets that we wanted to do to present it. And then eventually, and we, Shanti, my business partner, and I were like, we started too early, but when Netflix started coming into the region, it was a way, it opened the door for us to figure out, okay, it can be for a platform. And when we presented it to them, initially it was for a live action, but at that point, serendipity, they were like, well, what about an animated series? Which we didn't really consider, but it turned out to be probably the best choice because you could do everything you wanted to do, not worry so much about the budget of it because it kind of comes in with the territory. And then it was going to be distributed worldwide on a platform. So with that came the next set of challenges is now how to break it down. I think at this point the graphic novel had 6, but now there are 8 volumes. So from the 6 volumes, what would we pick and choose? How would we thread it together? How would we structure this mystery for 6 episodes? So it'd be 6 episodes, like a half hour each. And then the other layer of that is, yes, we make it for a primary Philippine audience, but you're on a global platform. So then we also had to consider, what about the people who didn't grow up in the Philippine culture? Because there is also something for them. Like I said, it was a noir, it's a mystery. It was just fun, and it was a great way to introduce our culture, and they had accessible touch points for it to come in. So in the writing process, and I worked with 2 other writers, Mick Vergara and Zing Marasigan. We structured it along with the animation director, Jay Oliva, himself Filipino, but grew up in the States. So there was this, we worked on crafting it as a mystery and then interjecting sort of the stories, melding them, but then we still had a bigger mystery following through, but each episode also had something that you could solve and sort of like a monster of the episode to delve into. What was fun for us in the process was that it allowed us to play with, sort of really show Manila in a very contemporary way, where it hadn't really been seen to this level. So when Jay Oliva and the art director, Jojo, came to Manila, I wanted to make sure it was represented visually as well, in a very contemporary way because it hadn't been seen. They mostly grew up in the US, so they needed to kind of see it. So the first day they came, I don't know if you're familiar, we have a train system called the MRT. So I took them from one section, which is 13 sections, 13 stations, so that they could, which is also in the book, to kind of give them an overview of where this journey was going to start and then how we were going to go through it. So with that, it gave them the context to also visually understand what we were writing, because we were really writing it from a very contemporary setting, but making sure that there was places for people to understand where we talk about tikbalang and we explain it just enough for the context of the mystery, but if people wanted to learn more about it, they could look it up. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So that from that became, as you see, a smattering of what it looks like in the series, which you can all go watch on Netflix. It's also in multiple languages. So we were quite happy because we were able to do sort of several details where you have sort of like San Telmo, which is a fire spirit, put it on the scene for the first time. I don't think we've ever seen that kind of as a visual way. But also do sort of daily life tidbits, like standing in front of the panaderia or the bake shop to get your morning pandesal with your coffee. So there was a lot of things that we were happy about putting in terms of translating the world, in the writing into this visual sense. Can we go to the next slide? So when we came out, it was during the pandemic. So 2021, Netflix had wanted to do sort of a bigger campaign for the Philippines, but they had to do it when we were all kind of sequestered in our homes to watch. You know, in one hand, you had like a lot of people tuning in because what else was there to do if they were lucky enough to have Netflix? What surprised us though later is that it actually found an audience outside the Philippines that wasn't the diaspora. So I think we were like top 10 in about 19 countries afterwards. But I think if there had been more, it might have been more accessible. But if we were looking online and we found that there was one forum that I think Budget was talking about in an interview. Someone was interviewing him who was African American, and there was one forum that he was in where they said, hey, have you seen Netflix? It's so great. Why don't we have that? And then they're like, no, we have Jujutsu Kaisen, or there's another anime that they had. And then they're like, no, but Tressa is more, it's more black, it's more African American than, you know, culturally they really connected. And for us, it's more, it really showed me that the more you lean into the specific, whether it's cultural, but if the emotional is universal, it's ultimately relatable. So you can show your culture as long as you have what is at the core universal, which is our human story, our emotional journey for the character. Next slide, please. And so to sum it up, like we were able to reach other people, you know, we were able to kind of hopefully give them a taste. Obviously, some people who are fans of the book wanted their own way of doing it, but everyone who's a fan of a book will understand everyone has their own way of seeing it for like the audio visual. But for us at least, it was like a first salvo, like a way to put it out there that we really thought about well in terms of translating the world on the page to something that was visual. So.
Brevity is a virtue of our panelists, so we have a lot of time for discussion. I'm going to open the floor now for questions or comments. Anyone? Yes, sir, and then sir over here. Yes, so.
Hello, will be there season 2 for?
I love you. So, we're trying, but in a way, you know, K-pop Demon Hunters is taking a lot of the bandwidth. If we can kind of push for more, because I think it can coexist with Tressa, then if there is more clamor, then I think maybe they can pay attention. Like, it's still on the radar. We still talk about it in meetings, but I think there just needs to be, you know, they're like, oh, it was out in 2021 and it's 2025. So if we can spearhead more of traction, then we might be good.
For Sarge, what's the creative process like? Because you wrote, you produced Aaron, but you worked with somebody else to direct it, right? My nephew. What's the tension like for that?
That's a good question because I happen to work with a director who's half Filipino and half Belgian. No? He's a Filipino-Belgian director, and that provided great insight into how the film would translate artistically to not a foreign audience necessarily, but outside of ourselves, no, outside of our Filipino selves, no, and because Dominic and I are great intellectual friends, I should say that, no, are great intellectual friends. We sort of trusted each other on how these things could come together. He has it's very rare to have a director who is so well read. You know, he would be carrying a copy of Malraux or something like that, and I'd be very impressed. No, I'd find him very performative, but obviously he'd read it. No, obviously he'd read it. So his copy is still with me. I'm attempting to read it. No, but seriously, as I've mentioned this many times, that you know more writers should watch movies and more movie makers should read books. No, the reason for that is that cinema is Filipino literature. If you want to understand Filipinos, it's really through our cinema, I should say. It is our ascendant sign, it is our ascendant signal in terms of culture. The reason for that is we're able to be more authentic when it comes to cinema. You can't have a movie where you go worsh. Worsh is shorthand for, you know, speaking English as a Filipino. educated in English in a very Catholic school and in a very sort of middle class, upper middle class environment. I'm a product of that kind of schooling, and I've had to sort of break my hand and really enter, a world where the character spoke through. The family driver would speak like a family driver, and Annette, since you're Annette who is here, she's a translator from Filipino to German. You understand this. There are really so many codes. There's so many class codes. Like, this driver would not speak this way. His employer would not speak this way. They would not speak to each other inside a car. In fact, there'd be complete silence between them, other than the commands that the employer would give to the driver, right? Dominic, the director, provided the cinematic eye to the literal language that I had put out originally in English, and I had translated into Filipino. No, luckily it's contemporary Filipino, so it's very easy for me to do that. No, I wouldn't be able to write something in archaic Filipino, but that kind of combination of me being a writer, like solidly starting a film project as a story, or a book, and him entering from the cinema side, seeing things as movies, really worked for us. In fact, it was my director, Dominic, who chose an errand out of all my stories and asked me, can you write a script about this? So in other words, he had to be a reader at first, and he had to actually like the story. I wasn't pushing it on him. Of course, I told him, only if I get to produce it. No, but seriously, that provided really a great sort of substrate for us to work on. And that was my primary concern. How do we make it still authentically Filipino in the sense that people would get it? That kind of combination seemed to work, because now we're working on our next project. It's a bigger project. It's about the last days of disco in Manila, during martial law. So it's an exciting project, but it also requires a lot of knowledge about Filipino culture and history, a lot of knowledge about disco as well. Luckily, I was born in a disco, and things are coming together. But I actually prefer being a writer, just a writer, and a creative producer, than to enter the world of a filmmaker of a director as a filmmaker. I believe that the director must, in a way, I don't believe in the director as an auteur in that sense. The film is its own. The film has to write itself. Especially a film that requires so much cross-translation and internal translation before it's delivered to its audience. So we did have, in fact, a lot of conversations about how authentic it should be, how to deliver that authenticity. And the last point I should make, and I'm very excited to deliver this point, because it's always the point I want to make about anything that we create. Is that we had to make something that was innovative, that had not been done, not a better version of this or a better version of that. It was supposed to sort of push not the envelope, but push the communication medium a little bit. And being a writer, I think, provided that little push, because I was not doing it from the cinematic side. I was not looking at it as a filmmaker. Although in fact, I think I love film more than literature. It's so hard to write a book. I mean, Charles Sonong is on the audience. He's written like 74 books. And he has, his next film is in Cinemalaya, and I'm so excited about that. But to enter cinema from the literary side, from a writer's side, is something that's really exciting for me. And to have a director on the other end of that table who understands cinema so well, and who gives you the trust, as a fellow reader, is something that is quite unique. So I have my director to thank always for that. And because of that, I will always prefer to work with him over anybody else.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. If I saw it correctly, on one of your slides, there was a picture of a live action version of Trece. Is that right? Was it done as a live action in the end?
No, but there are plans, so
Okay.
I can only say that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's very inspiring. I have a very practical question as a practical translator. Like I know from Korean German, translating subtitles of Korean series has become a source of income or something, because as a literary translator you cannot make an income that lets you live. So you need other sources, and actually Korean
Demon
series,
Hunter.
yeah, is one, but that's also threatened now by AI. But my practical question for both of you, like as in the art house sector, but also with Netflix, how do you envision German subtitles? And if yes, are they translated via English, or is there? Do you know of films where there's a direct translation from Filipino into German for the subtitles?
So for a platform, normally they work with a group. Like there's a group that already does subtitles, because you actually have to submit the work, deliver the work at least like 4 months before they launch it, because they do it for localization, which is both, and they do it in multiple languages for subtitles as well as for dubbing. So, but they already work with like Netflix has this group that is worldwide. So I'm not sure how they do it. Because this was commissioned, Netflix commissioned Trece out of Los Angeles. The initial language we had to deliver it in is in English. So luckily, we as the writers could write in English. But I also oversaw the Filipino dub for Trece. But we made it so, and we worked with one of the best people in the business, Rudolph Baldonado. He's also like an animation voice director, as well as spearheading a lot of the major subtitle translations and dubbing for like Disney Plus, all the big outfits. And we really talked about language. We were selective about like, okay, what's the cadence, what kind of, in terms of this character, where does he sit in society? Like we took all of that into account. And just a tidbit, I know it's a bit far from your question, but in that sense, because you're doing it for like a dub, some words you have to choose that fit the motion of the animation. So there is that, from a writing perspective as well, for the writers here, it's also interesting because one, you're looking at multiple words that might have a meaning that you want to convey the best meaning, but at the same time, you're also looking what fits this mouth and timing. So it was funny. But in terms of, yes, for sure, I don't know if they do a direct, like Filipino to German, but that's always preferable because it's one less language you're translating from.
In our case, I have to sort of invoke a lot of things. No? In literature, for example, when you think about the concept of world literature, Kundera famously wrote an essay on world literature. No? In fact, there's a German word for it. No? Yes, no, it's a very sacred German word, no, Weltliteratur, right? And that word really captures it. No, you will always lose something in the translation. No, if you read Tolstoy or if you read, I have not. If you read, I have. If you read, if you read Tolstoy or if you read Dostoevsky, you'll always read the language that you're most comfortable with. You won't read in the original Russian. So we don't know if we've lost something or gained something. There are always better translations than others. But that stands for literature. When it comes to an audiovisual medium like cinema, then you have the visuals to support you with a sort of visual context. This is quite relevant to films like An Errand. In fact, my second film, which is a more commercial film, Song of the Fireflies, is going to have. It's about the Lobok Children's Choir, so it's for family viewing. No, I'm surprised. I surprised myself by showing something that kids can actually watch. No, we're having a screening in Uruguay, and I've had to translate everything into English, deliver the English SRT, dot SRT, meaning the subtitles file to them, and they'll translate it into Spanish. No, I'm sure that there'll be a lot lost, but I'm not so concerned about that because when you're looking at the screen, there's a different. You see the whole context of audiovisual communication, and this is why cinema is such a powerful component of literature. It's such a powerful literature by itself, no? Because you will see it immediately as world literature, and you will ingest it immediately in relation to your own context, no? And without losing as much as you would have if you read a bad translation of, Noli Me Tangere or any other Filipino book, no? In fact, we grew up on bad translations of Noli Me Tangere and El Filibuster. Not bad, no, lacking translations, I should say. They lack nuance, no? They lack certain cultural attachments to it that should have been there. In cinema, this is not so much felt, no? In fact, you can watch cinema without the subtitles and, certain films and understand it, no? That's the power of cinema. So there's also tension there, no? So, I'm sorry if I'm speaking long, but my heart's so in it, no? So, as a filmmaker or as a creator, then you must seek the challenge somewhere else. No, the challenge now lies not in the text, but in the audiovisual creation, no? In the visuals that are speaking to you, no? Whether they're backed by music, whether they're animation, no? So then you carry on the challenge to something else. There must always be a challenging part in any material that you do. So it translates to that. I hope that answers your question. Sorry. If it doesn't, then it means, I'm a bad translator.
Anyone else? We got a lot of time. Anyone else? The floor is open. No? Well, I have a question actually. I have questions in reserve because I want to avoid these awkward silences. You both mentioned the two audience problem. So you're writing for Filipinos, but obviously we are in an era of Netflix. We're in an era of screenings all over the world. And that's an act of translation, and there's a lot of tension involved there as well. But on the other hand, I also got the sense that you guys are not fussed, that you feel like if you write for Filipinos, or if you write something that's true for Filipinos, then the audience can eavesdrop. And so I want to ask about this question of, this notion of eavesdropping. How do you think about eavesdropping, and when people are eavesdropping into conversations we're having amongst ourselves? What do you want them to pick up on?
Thank you. It feels like a pointed question because an errand is all about eavesdropping.
Oh,
You're looking into the car where the driver and his passengers are having their own moment. It's a closed chamber. It's basically an internal chamber, no? Yes, you can see it as eavesdropping, but you can also see it as sort of exhibitionism, no? Which is the quite the opposite of eavesdropping, no? I think that the Filipino is exhibitionist, no? I think that we are, no? In fact, I'm naked under my clothes, no? But seriously, I think that cinema contains its own sort of, when we screen a film, we're really showing off our culture. It is not a matter of, look at this, you peek into our culture, it's a nice peek into our culture. You look inside our culture. It is in fact us shouting out, we have to make it clear that this is what we are showing, and this is what we are doing, this is our intent. No? So that's what, to me, pure cinema is about. Where it delivers exactly what I intended to be, what I intended to deliver, both visually, as a visual form and as an audio form. No, those two put together inseparably become the exhibitionist that it is. No, so when I'm looking at it, I'm affronted by it and I understand it. I'm no longer eavesdropping as an audience. That is what I want to do. So this is also why I consider, I'm not going to talk about others, but I consider myself always working in a state of failure, I have to say. Because if your film doesn't make it, so to speak, to the audience you like. I mean, of course, you hit Rotterdam, that's fantastic, but didn't hit wide theatrical distribution in the Philippines. No. Then I feel that I failed, no, because it wasn't exhibitionist enough for people to realize, hey, this is something I want, I want to see this act of exhibitionism. No, we're not inviting them to peek. We're showing off, and this is where Netflix comes in, no? And this is where everything is on display, and you just simply have to choose. No, so interestingly, no, an errand is showing on all Emirates flights. So not really this month and next month. So if you ride Emirates, you can see it on the plane. Please do not leave a review unless it's positive. No, really, we need the letterboxed stars. No, but seriously, interesting, and we're happy for that, no? And the end of the road, as you know, for distribution deals is streaming. That's where either it gets buried or it finds new life, no? And that's where it becomes, you're competing with other exhibitionists, I should say.
I think in my case, because I'm very much an introvert, so exhibitionism is
That's why you're a producer.
Yeah, I'm like, no. But I get what you're saying.
So no nude scenes for you, no?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, okay.
Ikaw lang. In my case, any project I approach, it has to be about, because I also approach it as an audience member. Ultimately, we're all audience members, even as a creator. We're readers, even if you're writing. We're audience members, even if we're producing. So for me, it's what I like as an audience member is going on a journey with the people I see on screen. So maybe I understand what you're saying where it's eavesdropping, but actually it's more, for me, it would be like, oh, can I relate with that? Can I suspend my disbelief to go on this journey and think about, like, would I be making the same choices as this character, or would I be doing it differently? But at least the empathy and understanding of, like, the context of that character going on the journey. For me, that's the starting point in crafting what is the tale? What is the interesting way we can follow this character? Do we understand this character even though we weren't born or raised in the same context? So with that, especially with something like Trece, yes, you're writing for a Filipino audience, but it's not really that much different from writing for an audience in general. Because the number one is, what's this character's emotional journey? Is it something I can at least understand the starting point and the context of? And then when you start crafting the journey itself and where you want to go in the end, then it's a whole, feast of options. But at the end of the day, you still need a roadmap in your head as a writer. You still need to know, okay, where do I want to end up? And in my case, because I'm an audience member, I also want it to be fun for the audience as well. Like, I want it to be fun for me, for all of us to enjoy, whether that ends in tears or anger or laughter. The satisfaction, we all love hearing a good story, and we know it. We feel like it's a good story once you get to the end as well, right? How do you feel about it after? Are you thinking about it, or was it fun in the moment? And there's so many different kinds of stories for that. So the point where you write for a different audience is, I think, more in the editing, where if it's an international audience, Filipinos might understand the context straight from the bat, but then when we look at the editing, when we're looking at it again, we're like, is this explained enough? Is there enough context for them to get? We don't over-explain, but at least enough to kind of continue the journey with this character. So I think on a practical level, that's kind of where the thinking about an audience that won't understand the context comes from.
I want to add something. When you talked about you particularly talked about voyeurism. No? It's a little bit of voyeurism. I want to add to the idea of failure in for example, movies like An Errand, in art house films, as Annette put it. No, and you put it very fairly and squarely. No, art house films. No. there is a real danger in that also. If let's go back to, for example, Mike De Leon's Kakaba Kaba, no, which is, I would say, his most easiest film for him to make, in the sense that they just sat around, did some drugs, and there's a film, right? The point I'm trying to make is that, as somebody not of that class, it's a bit of a voyeuristic thing to go there and look at it. It's like going over Instagram and looking at the rich lives of corrupt contractors and saying, boy, I wish I had that kind of life, right? Or what is that kind of life, right? What is it to have a $300, meal, in a restaurant? I'll never have one, you know what I mean? And to achieve that is so difficult for an art house film. For somebody for a driver, for example, to watch an errand and say, I get it. I get him. I understand why this film went to Rotterdam. I can't imagine it happening. So there is a disconnect. And even though, even if it becomes so exhibitionist that you want to show the whole world, how do we connect to ourselves? Because we're so fragmented as a society. No? How do we show it to ourselves? Who do we show it to? Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, over there, ma'am. Thank you.
Hi, you talked about the end goal or sort of being streaming, and I was wondering whether that the streaming platform then sort of affects how you adapt the work right upstream in terms of how you write it, or even the formats that you choose to adapt it into.
If I may. Hi. So for streaming, you have to think also the streamers have an agenda with kind of what projects they end up picking. It's not a very complicated agenda. They want wide audience to come and watch the streaming. And lately the trend is to be a little bit more populist, not so much niche for them. But at the same time, they also want interesting projects that you don't see anywhere else. So it really depends in terms of the sum of the project, and does it tick the boxes that they want, for that quarter even, because it can change sometimes from quarter to quarter. In my experience, number one, they want an interesting story that they feel would pull an audience in. And then the second factor, which also as a producer you have to take into consideration, is what's your packaging? What's the hook? Is it a star? Is it based on a popular, IP or intellectual property, a graphic novel? Is it a classic maybe that people would have wanted to see? So it's more the choice that it affects with the with the streaming platforms. And also at the end of the day, there are certain standards that they want to maintain. So maybe they won't go too political, or they have to clear it with their legal. So those are the considerations you have to make. In our case, though, in terms of creative, especially for Trece, we were lucky to do it at the time where they're like, yeah, lean into it being very Filipino. They really weren't concerned with let's make it very whitewashed or Western. So luckily, we didn't have to deal with that. And we were able to really lean into the Filipino-ness of doing something like Trece for Netflix.
I'm going to dare answer that question, even though we're not in the streaming space. No, but seriously, the day that they featured our film in Mubi, as a movie, you never really get to watch the film you want to watch because it's always showing in that other territory that you can't watch it in. But the day they featured our film in Mubi was really a great day, a great bright day for us, because it's a different kind of audience, right? Mubi is sort of an exotic bookstore of the streaming market. It's a very, very, very eccentric bookstore run by some guy who's gone out of his mind, but it looks at art house, how many art house distribution. It looks at festival distribution for that, and it looks at the film itself, to see that if it fits their programming. So it remains a dream for us, and obviously that's the end of the road for our film if we get to Mubi, but we'll be happy if it gets there.
One last question. So we have time for one final question. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, Tanya. You mentioned about empathy. So I was just curious, when you adapt a story rooted in a specific culture, how do you decide which emotions are universal and which belong uniquely to that place?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I think you just have to approach it as the person. Like if you were relating to that person or just kind of understanding, like with Tressa, you're adapting it from a graphic novel, so you've seen her journey. But the thing with Tressa also as a graphic novel, it's a great mystery, but they didn't have enough space for like where she is emotionally. So you kind of you kind of have to be a detective yourself in terms of figuring out where is she emotionally based on my clues with how the story goes. And with Tressa, it's like she comes from this tightly knit family, but then she suffers a tragedy, when she's younger, where she loses her father. And she has the responsibility of picking up where her father left off. And then not just any responsibility, but kind of, saving innocent people from the clutches of like supernatural beings that, can trick you with magic or devour you with their fangs. That aside, you kind of put it in a more real world term where, okay, this woman has a responsibility for carrying on a family legacy that's not just kind of surface but emotional, while still dealing with the trauma of this legacy also caused her to lose her mother, her father, and a lot of her family. So you find a starting point, and then you look at where does that take you in the context of like what you have for the adaptation for the structure. Obviously, a little bit easier for an adaptation. Original, you're building that from scratch, but you still want it to be satisfying in that way. But in terms of the adaptation, you're Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out like how am I putting this puzzle together.
Okay, round of applause for Tanya and Sarge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.